there, folks. Before we dive in, just a quick message. If you want to keep up with stories like this one, make sure to follow S News so you don't miss any of our future videos. And if you want to support us, go ahead and subscribe, give us a like, and drop a comment below. It really helps us out. Chinese warship hits German spy plane with laser. Then this happened. Berlin was furious. The Chinese ambassador was summoned. No press conference, no smiles, just a stern warning. What happened was reckless. It was dangerous. But what triggered this sudden diplomatic storm between two global powers? At 7 o'clock in the morning, somewhere over the Red Sea, a German surveillance aircraft was flying at altitude. It was on a routine monitoring mission as part of Operation Aspides, a European Union effort to protect commercial ships from attacks by Houthi rebels. The skies seemed calm. Then something unexpected happened, something that was definitely not part of a standard patrol. Without any warning, a Chinese warship below fired a military-grade laser directly at the German aircraft. No radio call, no visual signal, just an invisible beam of light, silent but aggressive. The laser hit its target. Inside the aircraft, known as an MSP or multi-sensor platform, the civilian flight crew and German Bundeswehr mission operators scrambled. Alarms went off. Sensors started flashing. They didn't know exactly what the laser had done, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just hostile, it was a message. Within minutes, the mission was aborted. The aircraft made a sharp turn and headed toward Djibouti. No one was hurt and there was no visible damage, but the message had been received loud and clear in Berlin. Germany called the action reckless, unacceptable and dangerous. The Chinese ambassador was summoned that very day. What was supposed to be a simple patrol had now turned into a full-blown diplomatic incident, one that could change how the EU responds to China's growing presence in the Middle Eastern waters. Laser attacks between military powers aren't exactly new, but between China and Europe, that's a first. And when something like this happens during a high-risk mission in an active conflict zone, everyone takes notice. So what exactly is an MSP? What kind of laser was used, and why did China decide to fire it now? Buckle up, the story is just beginning. The German plane in question wasn't a fighter jet or a drone. It was something more specialized and much less obvious. The MSP is a civilian-registered aircraft performing military surveillance tasks. It's operated by a civilian crew under contract, with onboard systems handled by Bundeswehr mission specialists. These aircraft don't carry missiles. They carry eyes and ears, long-range optics, radar systems, infrared scanners, and electronic intelligence gear. Their job is to monitor the sea's surface, track ship movements, and identify threats to European commercial shipping. Think pirates, missile launchers, or drones, especially in places like the Red Sea, where Iranian-backed Houthi rebels have recently attacked cargo ships. This brings us to Operation Aspides, launched in early 2024. It's Europe's direct response to the chaos in one of the world's most vital shipping lanes, the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. These waters move fuel, food and tech across continents. Aspides was supposed to be purely defensive. No offensive strikes, no escalation, just patrols, escorts and electronic surveillance. But now a Chinese naval vessel has added a whole new complication. What kind of ship was it? Official sources won't say, but defense analysts suspect it was a Type 052 destroyer or something similar, both of which are equipped with laser-based defense systems. These lasers are usually meant to blind drones or jam optics. But if misused or aimed deliberately, they can be extremely dangerous, and here's the uncomfortable part. China isn't part of Operation Aspides. It wasn't coordinating with European forces. According to German officials, there was no communication before the laser hit. No identification, no warning, just a shot in the dark, literally. With European, American, Chinese and even Iranian forces all operating in overlapping zones, a single misstep could spark something far worse. But this wasn't a mistake. Military-grade lasers might sound like science fiction, but they're a very real threat to anyone conducting surveillance over tense waters. The German MSP was flying at medium altitude on a steady patrol. Below, the suspected Chinese warship was cruising through international waters. Then, without any kind of contact, it activated what Germany later described as a military-grade laser system and aimed it directly at the surveillance aircraft. The laser wasn't visible to the naked eye, but its effects were obvious. First, the MSP's optical sensors started malfunctioning, flashing, flickering and distorting. Some of the video feeds turned completely white or red, classic signs of overexposure to a laser. These platforms rely on high-energy optics to track threats across the sea. A blinding pulse like that can temporarily disable or even permanently damage those sensors. Second, the crew's situational awareness was compromised. While no pilots were physically harmed, they reported system alerts and interference on key instruments, surveillance equipment and a silent message. This kind of sensor disruption matches the effects of directed energy exposure, especially if the beam was strong enough to interfere with the aircraft's systems. Within 24 hours of the incident, Germany's foreign ministry summoned the Chinese ambassador, demanding an urgent explanation. The tone was direct. Germany called the laser strike completely unacceptable, accusing China of endangering personnel and disrupting a European Union security operation. This wasn't just about Germany. It was a targeted act against a multinational European mission. Germany's defense minister confirmed the mission was immediately aborted, saying, "The safety of our personnel is non-negotiable." He labelled China's action irresponsible, dangerous and escalatory. But the fallout didn't stop there. German officials began pressing the EU's Political and Security Committee to review threat protocols. In Brussels, diplomats started asking aloud, should Chinese forces still be treated as passive observers or as potential saboteurs in a volatile region? Meanwhile, Beijing stayed silent. No denial, no explanation, no justification. Just a calm, calculated silence. Strategic and deeply troubling. Germany is no stranger to global tensions. But this wasn't about Taiwan or the South China Sea. This happened in a region where Europe is actively deployed under a legal mandate to protect one of the world's most vital trade routes. Now, some German officials are pushing to update the rules of engagement, especially for surveillance missions near hostile forces. Others are urging caution, not wanting to further escalate tensions with China. But behind closed doors, one thing is crystal clear. This wasn't routine interference. This was a deliberate message. Even NATO took notice. Although Operation Aspides is an EU-led mission, major military alliances are now closely watching the Red Sea. Because this wasn't just a flash of light in the sky, it was a political flare. One that was seen all the way from Berlin to Brussels. The Red Sea isn't just another stretch of ocean, it's one of the most strategically sensitive maritime corridors on the planet. Every day, tankers and cargo ships carry fuel, food, electronics and rare minerals through this narrow route. Any disruption here sends shockwaves through global supply chains. That's exactly why Europe launched Operation Aspides in the first place, to protect civilian shipping from Houthi drone and missile attacks linked to the chaos in Yemen. But what started as a mission to stop rebel strikes is now colliding with a much larger great power competition. China's navy has been quietly expanding its presence in the area. In Djibouti, just across the water from Yemen, Beijing runs its first overseas military base. Officially, it's for anti-piracy operations. Unofficially, it serves as a forward operations hub for the PLA Navy, with destroyers, drones and electronic warfare units. The laser incident makes one thing clear. China is no longer a passive observer. It's actively shaping the security environment, even if that means clashing with EU forces in what's supposed to be a coordinated mission zone. Europe isn't used to this kind of behavior from China. Yes, there have been trade disputes and tech-related tensions, but a direct military incident is something new, and it's forcing Brussels to rethink how it views China, not just as an economic competitor, but as a potential military disruptor far beyond Asia. There's a precedent too. Remember back in 2020 when a Chinese destroyer fired a similar laser at a US Navy ship, the USS Poseidon in the Pacific? Washington condemned the act, but Beijing said nothing. Sound familiar? That same strategic silence is now rattling European allies. Because if lasers are being used as warning shots, or worse, tests, then every patrol flight and escort mission becomes a potential flashpoint. This isn't just about the Red Sea anymore. It's about China flexing its hard power outside its traditional sphere of influence and catching Europe in the crosshairs. In a world already strained by overlapping conflicts from Ukraine to the South China Sea, no one's in the mood for a miscalculation. Inside EU military planning rooms, the conversation has shifted. One question now dominates every briefing. Was this a one-off event or a warning? If China was trying to send a message, it's been received, loud and clear. The German MSP aircraft was unarmed. The mission was legal and the airspace was international. Yet China used a high-powered laser to interfere. That's not an accident. It's a deliberate show of force, maybe even an attempt to redefine who has the right to operate in the region. EU leaders now face a tough choice. If they reroute patrols to avoid Chinese ships, it could look like weakness, as if they're backing down from a mission to protect global trade. If they keep flying close, they risk more confrontations. One mistimed maneuver or communication breakdown could trigger real escalation. EU surveillance aircraft like the MSP weren't built to handle laser attacks. They were never meant to be. But now that may have to change. NATO has long discussed laser countermeasures for fighter jets like optical filters, thermal shielding and repositioning sensors, but now those talks are speeding up in Brussels and Berlin. Behind the scenes, several EU countries are calling for joint protocols on how to respond to directed energy attacks, something that, until now, was barely mentioned in military handbooks. The legal side is murky too. Military experts note that international law doesn't clearly define a laser strike as an armed attack unless it causes injury or physical damage. And that grey area is exactly why these weapons are so tempting. They blur the line between provocation and escalation. Drone missions will continue, that's certain. The German plane was forced to land, but only briefly. Patrols have resumed, with slightly adjusted flight paths. Crews now fly with one eye on the radar and the other watching for anything glowing below. The real shift isn't just tactical, it's psychological. China has forced the EU to recognize something important. They're not just peacekeepers anymore. They're players in a game where the rules are being rewritten. One invisible beam at a time, one laser, no injuries, no wreckage, but a completely new chapter in European security. What happened over the Red Sea wasn't random. It was a test of engagement rules, diplomatic nerve, and the EU's ability to operate in a world where shows of force don't follow old borders. Germany reacted fast. The EU is reviewing its protocols, but the bigger picture is still unclear. China isn't just rising, it's reaching into spaces Europe once assumed were safe, or at least neutral. That illusion shattered beam by beam. Right now, Operation Aspides continues, but every MSP in the sky is now a potential target, not for missiles, not for radio jammers, but for lasers and modern interference tools. They're not always loud, they're not always explosive, but they're always calculated. And that raises the big question. If China's willing to target a European plane on a legal defensive mission, what boundary won't it cross next? Finally, thanks for listening, folks. If you found this insightful, make sure to follow S News and keep an eye out for future videos. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. We'd love to